Hi everybody and welcome to Impact. I'm Nick Barber, your host for the government segment. Today my guest is Bryant. Bernie, if I may call you Bernie.
Sure, absolutely.
Is an attorney and you have an interesting background. Welcome, Bernie.
Thank you very much.
To Impact.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about the Florida decision, the Zimmerman verdict in Florida.
Yes, sir.
In a few minutes. That's our topic today. But a little bit about you. You're presently the president of the Albany branch of
Yes,
the
sir.
NAACP.
Yes,
You
yes, sir.
live in Albany, New York?
Pretty much all my life.
Pretty much? You grew up in Albany?
I grew up in Albany.
Great.
But,
And you were formerly practiced criminal law in your career.
well, occasionally I still practice it.
You
but,
still do. And you're a lobbyist too.
Yes, sir.
And what kind of lobbying?
We have a number of clients. It's the Miriam Group, which is New York City based, but they're political consultants as well as lobbyists. So there are two employees that they have up here that pretty much head their lobbying operation at the state level.
Right.
And then they do lobbying at the New York City level, as well as political consulting.
So you have a diverse background. That's great.
Yeah.
What made you want to become an attorney? How did that happen? Can you think back
Well,
that far?
Yeah.
How did it happen?
The first inkling, I was maybe 8 or 9, and both of my parents were very garrulous and talkative, as well as I had an older brother, and I have an older brother.
That's the kind of guest we like at Impact.
Right.
Yeah.
And I have an older brother who
Yeah.
also was pretty verbose.
Good.
I was the youngest in the family.
Yeah.
And I had an uncle who was a practicing attorney in New York City, and one day he let me shadow him. I was like 8 or 9 years old. And the thing that impressed me was that when he spoke, everybody listened. And I couldn't get a word in edgewise in my house, so I said, well, that's got to be pretty interesting life.
That's the way to get
So I decided then and there I wanted to be a lawyer.
Well, that's actually a pretty good thought for an 8 or 9-year-old.
Right.
And where did you go to school?
I was trained at, it's now no longer the Milne School in Albany, which is the junior high and high. And I went to Howard University in Washington, D.C., and then Albany Law School.
Great.
For my legal training.
Well, it's great to have you here, Bernie. And our topic is this recent verdict in Florida. Zimmerman and the victim was Trayvon Martin. This was, to make people more familiar, this was the Neighborhood Watch.
Yes, yeah.
Give us a little background for the audience.
Okay.
He was armed, I guess.
No, yeah.
That was the biggest problem, that he was armed.
Yeah. Well, the basic facts, I guess, and that came out at the trial, basically, is that Trayvon Martin, who was, I believe, 17 at the time or 16, was proceeding from a neighborhood store. His father had a home in the complex, and he had a bag of Skittles and a cell phone, and he was wearing a hoodie. So that attracted somehow the attention of this Zimmerman, who was a neighborhood watch person.
Yes.
And at the trial, they even had conversations that he had with the 911 dispatchers and so forth, in which they said, don't follow him. We've got the report. Please don't take matters in your own hand. Just stay in your car and whatever, and don't follow him.
That's what Neighborhood Watch.
Exactly. It said, we'll respond. Okay, we'll have someone respond. And apparently he ignored that advice. He got out of his vehicle, and eventually he was confronting, to hear him say it, or by accident, but in fact, a confrontation occurred. Okay. And it's confusing as to what happened in that confrontation, who was the aggressor and who wasn't. But he made the claim that he was taking the worst of it, and that he reasonably felt that his life was in danger. So he pulled out a gun that he was carrying and shot the teenager who was unarmed. Originally, the local authorities, I believe it's the town of Sanford, it's near Orlando. Okay. But originally the authorities didn't arrest him for like some 40 days, really? Citing the stand your ground statute that Florida apparently has, wherein if a person is legally where they're in a space where they're legally are supposed to be, they're not trespassing or burglarizing a place. Yes. And they feel that they reasonably feel that their life is in danger or that serious physical injury is going to be inflicted upon them. They don't have a duty to retreat. They don't have to retreat and they can stand their ground and resort to deadly physical force if they have it, if they deem it necessary.
Is that a law that's unique to Florida? Because that's
Apparently
pretty
not.
heavy, isn't it?
Yeah, apparently not. ALEC, which is the American something, I'm going to have a cheat sheet here, the American, American Legislative Exchange Council is a conservative-funded outfit that collaborates from time to time with state legislators and business people to develop model legislation, usually of a conservative bent. So that ALEC has now been responsible, the acronym for the American Legislative Exchange is ALEC.
Yes.
They have now put forth model legislation, and I believe it's almost 30 states have adopted this particular model legislation, the stand your ground. I believe, and
because I thought it'd be really a small.
yeah. Well, I think the NRA got behind it too, the National Rifle Association. So that in conjunction with ALEC and the National Rifle Association, which has some pretty potent political tentacles in some states.
That's true.
They developed this legislation that modified traditional notions of self-defense. One of the states that wasn't seduced by this was New York State. It maintained the normal common law definition of self-defense, in which there's a very pronounced duty to retreat if you can. Duty to retreat with impunity, if you can extract yourself from a situation without a danger or whatever. And of course, this guy, if he just got back in his truck, would have been safe. I mean, from whatever.
Did the victim do anything to make him feel his life was in danger? I mean, he was unarmed, he was a teenager.
Some would say the only.
He had candy and he had a cell phone.
Some would say
what did he do?
he was black. Some would say that he was black in a white neighborhood.
So
he was black in a predominantly white neighborhood, and that caused this fella to now single him out for special attention.
Okay. What were the charges against Zimmerman, the armed neighborhood watch individual? And then what was the verdict?
I think the top charge was murder in the second degree, and the judge decided during the course of the trial to charge a lesser included offense of manslaughter in the first degree. I believe the murder count required proof of intent. That is, that he intentionally did he squeezed the trigger with the intent to kill somebody.
Yes.
And he pulled the gun out with the intent to kill someone.
Yes.
The manslaughter count, I think, just required that he created a reckless situation, and because he created the reckless situation that resulted in a death, he had some criminal culpability. That seemed to play into the fact pattern where he got out of the truck, he confronted, he disobeyed basically the instructions from the 911 operator.
Yes.
So all of that kind of fed the notion of recklessness, that he created a reckless situation. Even though he might not have intended to kill anybody when he put these things in motion, he nevertheless put them in motion that recklessly created a situation where someone died. Yes. And so there was some hope that if the prosecution fell short on the intentional, that the jury would reach a compromise verdict on the manslaughter. And the defense attorneys, I guess, vociferously objected, but it nevertheless was submitted to the jurors. And I guess they decided that there was insufficient proof on either count, and they acquitted him. Okay, they totally acquitted him. In retrospect, part of the difficulty I think African Americans have in particular is that no evidence of racial profiling or no evidence that perhaps this individual was singled out, that Trayvon was singled out because he was black, was permitted to be heard by the jury. And plus the judge said that, well, race shouldn't matter, and they wouldn't allow a lot of evidence that perhaps would have come in. And I think that's part of the problem that African Americans have with the criminal justice system as it exists. That what happens is that there's such limiting factors. The only time race, even in New York, could maybe come in is if you're trying to prove a hate crime. That the reason the person acted was because of race.
Because of race, yeah.
And it doesn't allow for the jury to consider that the encounter might have been avoided, but for the fact that the person's ethnicity. I mean, black people feel very strongly that driving while black exists that people get pulled over because they might be a young person in a luxury vehicle, and the police now say, well, that fits a racial profile of a drug dealer or whatever, and they pull them over, and oh, lo and behold, they find them talking on their cell phone, so now they give them a ticket for the cell phone violation, and it escalates from there.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, there are these encounters that are basically put in motion because of the ethnicity of the actor. Sometimes there may be some uncovering of some minor wrongdoing because of it, or there might be some uncovering of some major wrongdoing. You pull a car over and there's a whiff of marijuana, so you now pull him out and you go through the car and you find a stash of cocaine in the trunk.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that to justify wrongdoers.
Well, we're talking about the legal process.
But the legal process
rights,
itself, what
rights.
happens is, I mean, it seems that many African Americans feel that what happens is, just because of their ethnicity, they now have these encounters which can sometimes escalate and spiral out of control, that many others, and Latino men and young men as well, that spiral out of control, where that's not a risk for Caucasian young men or even Asian young men to that degree, that they don't have this stigma where authorities, or in this case a neighborhood watch person, is extra vigilant just because of who they are. And it brings it out.
That's wrong.
So I think that's probably what resonates, kind of. And then the stand your ground legislation itself seems to be a bit of when applied to these facts, stand your ground seems to be a little out of whack with what we feel is fair play and fair justice.
Correct. Going back to the issue of this neighborhood watch individual was armed. I mean, maybe his weapon was legal, registered, whatever, but isn't that unusual for a neighborhood watch person to be
Apparently
armed?
not. I mean,
or to be, even if he had a permit or a license for the gun or whatever is necessary in Florida, as a neighborhood watch individual, I mean, I'm familiar with neighborhood watch in New York. I was a captain of a neighborhood watch at one time in my own neighborhood. And being armed was like,
well, yeah.
We're in New York State.
Right.
But, and the other thing was just, listen, see, and report. You don't take any action. You don't get involved or interact with the person. You observe and help the police or the law enforcement agencies, but you're not a cop.
Correct.
But the unusual part of this whole thing never would have happened if we didn't have a neighborhood watch person that was armed. Is that unique in Florida? Or
Florida.
Can anybody that has a gun carry it around, even though they're...
Apparently, Florida has some very lax laws in that regard.
Yeah.
Personal experience. The very day after the verdict was rendered, my wife and I flew down to Orlando for the NAACP National Convention, which, look, what have it, was right adjacent to the town where this thing had.
Yes. Yeah.
So it really was the focal point a lot. That and the Voting Rights Act decision by the Supreme Court was the focal point of the convention.
Yes.
We were in a pretty decent hotel, which is connected to and adjacent to they have a humongous convention center in Orlando.
I've been there.
It's
a mile long.
It's huge. Yeah. And our hotel was connected to that convention center, and there were other conventions going on. And one morning, it was like 9:30 in the morning on like a Thursday morning or whatever, or no, it was a Tuesday morning. I saw an individual walking with a pistol in his gun belt. I'm saying, there's no reason for him to be packing a pistol in a luxurious hotel. Basically, it was not necessarily a poor hotel.
Yes.
At 9:30 in the morning on a weekday, and he's in the convention center, and he wasn't law enforcement, but he was an attendee. Yes. So apparently, it's very prevalent down there for these people to be carrying handguns.
Was shocking.
And it was open. I mean, it wasn't concealed. So I understand they have a liberal concealed carry law too, but he was carrying it openly and notoriously in a holster. That it was like the Wild West.
I was just going to say that, like carrying a 6-shooter on your hip.
Correct.
Wow.
Correct.
That would shock me.
I was shocked.
I never saw anything.
In New York, I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, of course not. Well, now we were talking about profiling, and this is a case where the accusation would be profiling, and maybe it was. I'm not saying whether it was or wasn't. I'm not an expert, but you said there was a stop and frisk. legislation? What is that?
Well, no. There is
What does
on
that
the
mean?
books in New York is in New York State, not New York City, but in New York State, is a stop and frisk law, which says basically if the officer, it stems from, if you want a little, the legal history is probably under too much information.
That's okay.
But it stems from a decision that the U.S. Supreme Court made in the mid-'60s. I believe it was Terry v. Ohio. And in that, the Supreme Court said that where the police officers had a reasonable suspicion of some wrongdoing, they had a right to confront the person. And if they also simultaneously felt that that their lives were in danger, that is, the police officers' lives were in danger,
Yeah.
they could pat down or frisk the person that they stopped, basically to see if there were any weapons. So what happened was the New York legislature codified basically that decision and created what we call a stop and frisk law. It's contained, it's 140.50 of the criminal procedure law. And what happened is they basically said, if you have a reasonable suspicion that the individual is committing or about to commit a crime that's recognizable under the penal law, then you have a right to stop them. You have a right to demand who they are, get their identification and some explanation. They, on the other hand, have a Fifth Amendment right not to respond back to you, but you have a right to ask it.
Okay.
And that
So
if
you're knowledgeable enough as a
if you're knowledgeable enough and you're
victim or
saying none of your
whatever.
business, yeah, you can basically say none of your business and you're
Yeah.
within your constitutional
I
rights.
saw that happen at the Albany airport.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, it's a whole nother
So
story.
it's not-
but
but
they
then
were
you're-
passing out literature and information. They tried to throw them out of the airport,
Uh-huh.
but they knew their rights and they refused to leave. And when the police came in, they reinforced the demonstrators. They were demonstrators.
As long as it's
that they
peaceful.
did have
As
the
long as
right
it's peaceful,
to
yeah.
be there and distribute.
It's a public
literature.
place, yeah.
So that was really
As long as it's
something to watch.
peaceful,
So this
right.
is similar, but
But yeah, but anyway, the next phase of it is that if the police officers feel that they're threatened, they can pat folks down. What happens is, and what has happened, is that they have now created almost an art form to pat the people down and to now intrude. And even if it's not a hard object, but it feels like it's squishy, like it might be drugs or something, they will ask, well, what is that? And the typical person pulls it out, and once they pull it out, it's a visible contraband and it's actionable by a crime.
So they extended the legislation to themselves by embellishing to go
Correct.
further with it, not as it was
Correct.
originally intended.
The New York Police Department has gotten very aggressive in the way they interact. Some would, and as a result of that, legislators did put in a caveat or a codicil to the original legislation, which said, okay, in New York City only, we want you to keep statistics on this, okay? Because frankly, a lot of the minority group legislators from the city said, hey, they're targeting our kids, they're profiling the young
Yeah.
African American and young Latino youngsters, males in particular. And they're hassling them. They're basically are causing, on a day-to-day basis, they're hassling them in their own neighborhoods.
So what we're saying is this stop and frisk legislation sort of overrides into more liberal practice of profiling too.
Well, wait a minute, let me finish my
All
thought.
right, go ahead.
What happened was this was a New York City only
Oh, yeah, right.
uh, collection of data.
Okay.
What the data started to show, or has shown, is that the stops, although the Black and Latino population in New York City maybe accounts for like 45, 50% of
Yeah,
the
it's higher than
population,
upstate, yeah, that's true.
they accounted for 90% of the stops.
Wow, really?
Absolutely.
That's a big number.
So that
That's a big number.
our kids, the
Yeah.
minority group kids, were being encountered and confronted
Yeah.
on a very frequent basis
Yes.
by the NYPD, and folks of other ethnic backgrounds, most notably Caucasian young men,
Yes.
were hardly stopped at all
Yes,
in comparison.
yes.
So this now has become, there was a federal suit that's pending. The judge hasn't made her decision yet. It's a possibility that there may be a federal monitor appointed as a remedy for this to now oversee how the police department in New York City is administering stop and frisk. Now, I say all of that to say there's no sort of, in our neighborhoods up here in Schenectady and in Albany, there's no data collection requirement. And I would submit that the New York City data is not an outlier with respect to the upstate data.
Yeah.
I mean, I hear from concerned parents and so forth that and they do everything right. They have their child on a curfew. They hang out with similar youngsters who are same ethnicity, who have the same curfew.
Yeah.
One tells me that means they all are walking on the street together to get home by that curfew, 9:30, 10 o'clock, whatever it is, her 16-year-old. And she says he's stopped 3 times a week by Albany police. I mean, because of he's with other youngsters, and it's the summertime, and and it's nighttime. So she says as many as 3 times a week, her kid gets pulled over. Who is he? He has to pull out ID. They check for warrants. They check for and if you ever missed a court appearance and this and that sort of thing. Yep. So yes, this is happening in our communities. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that the New York City experience, while extreme, I don't think it's an outlier. I think that if you were to now ask a typical urban youngster who has a minority, who's from a minority, ethnic minority, they'll tell you, oh yeah, I get stopped by the police all the time. I get stopped frequently. Yes. I had one client not that long ago who was observing, his brother was being handed out traffic tickets for riding a motorbike in the city of Albany. And he had his cell phone out. And basically the police officer said, give me that. He said, why? The cell phone fell to he now charged him with obstructing governmental administration. It got thrown out. But he was basically going to use stop and frisk as a basis to now confiscate a cell phone. Well, I mean, and all he was an innocent bystander watching the officer make an arrest on a traffic infraction.
Pushing the envelope.
Of course. Yeah. And I mean, but that's kind of what's going out there in the streets now.
Yeah. We're visiting with Bryant, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Bryant.
Right.
Bernie's an attorney, a criminal attorney, a lobbyist, and he's the president of the Albany branch of the NAACP. And we've been talking about the Florida decision on the Zimmerman verdict, Trayvon Martin, the deceased victim, and the results of that, the laws, profiling, and ramifications of it. Bernie, this is a tragic thing that happened. Mm-hmm. But out of a tragedy, hopefully we can learn something. What have we learned from this decision and from all of the things that happened after this decision?
It's a fair question.
What good can come out of this?
Well,
as far as,
one of the things
we're talking about profiling and unfair laws and stop and frisk and things like that. What good can come out of this, and what do you think
from
might
NACP
happen because of this?
From our standpoint,
yes.
from our standpoint at the NACP, several things. We have an online petition, which if you go to the NACP, National NACP website, we'll have a link to that. Okay. More than 1 million people have signed it in protest of this. It's maybe even, I don't know what the exact number is, but last week it was more than 1 million.
Where does this petition go?
It's petitioning the U.S. Justice Department to now commence their own criminal proceeding against Zimmerman for the deprivation of civil rights and possibility that he participated or consummated a hate crime. Okay. And so that's in progress. That's one remedy. The other is it's now brought a focus, a harsh light to stand your ground statutes. Mm-hmm. Some celebrities have, I'm sorry about that. Okay, I forgot to turn that off. Yeah, that's okay. Some celebrities have, black celebrities in particular, have indicated that they're going to boycott the state of Florida until those laws are repealed. Okay. It's been an awakening, if you will, a blossoming of awareness now, especially among younger black folks. This could be their civil rights awakening. Yes. What seemed to have happened is complacency seemed to have set in because we were able to elect President Barack Obama and re-elect him. Mm-hmm. And the feeling is that among many minorities and certainly people who care about equal rights, white folks in particular care about equal rights, there was a complacency that, oh, well, we've done our civic duty, we've elected a black president, I guess things have really come that far. We did our part. We did our part. So I think what Trayvon Martin's demise has brought about is maybe an awareness, especially among our young people, that they're vulnerable. And they are not equal. They're treated differently, and that's not right. And hopefully that's going to ignite some awareness, and perhaps heighten the awareness of that racial profiling is not to be condoned. Yes. It shouldn't be permitted, and it should be condemned. And maybe there are some ways we can come up statutorily to effect that change. I'm trying to think of ways we might be able to do it, but there are other people out there too. So those are a couple of things. That, and you may recall a month ago, the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965 with respect to providing meaningful oversight to jurisdictions that historically deprive blacks access to the ballot box, and those were primarily the red states in the South. They had the history of it. So these two events hopefully will galvanize a whole new generation of right-thinking people. In the 60s, we had, as you may recall, because you're a gentleman of certain tenure, there was a very, very heightened awareness of civil rights and how to attain that and expand the civil rights to all of our citizens, of all, regardless of color, creed, ethnicity, or country of origin. Well, that kind of has subsided a little bit, or at least the awareness has subsided a little bit, and hopefully this will rekindle that sort of interest and that sort of urgency that the public policymakers are going to have to abide by. So, I mean, this is our hope.
Well, you hope that something good, that this young man didn't die in vain.
Correct.
That something good or something corrective or something fair.
Well, that's our hope.
And healing will come from this.
That's our hope. Yeah. And I think that will help heal, too. Yeah. I mean, his parents, for what it's worth, have been very dignified and have been very, very adamant that it's so that their son has not died in vain. Yes. They would like to see some things constructively happen. I think they've started a foundation, and they want to do an educational piece that will help educate folks as to racial profiling and the evils of it. So hopefully we'll make lemonade out of lemons, but it's a bad thing that happened. Well,
we want to thank you, Bernie Bryant, for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Albany, well, thank you again. President of the Albany branch of the NAACP. We've been talking about the Florida Zimmerman verdict and civil rights and profiling and laws, and it's been a very interesting conversation. I wish you well with your duties and responsibilities as president of the Albany branch of the NAACP. And maybe we can get that online petition information up on the screen if people want to sign the petition.
Well, it's the national, just if you punch in NAACP, national or whatever, and it'll
come up. So just go.
Just Google NAACP National. National. And it'll come up, and then there'll be a link to that petition.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, Bernie, and hope maybe you'll come back again and talk to us again and visit with us here on Impact.
Anytime.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you, sir.
You've been watching Impact. I'm your host, Nick Barber. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Proctors, bringing the best in arts, education, and entertainment.